Hello, good evening, everyone. We'll be starting very soon. It looks like everything's working. Okay. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, welcome everyone. This evening I'm going to speak about the second samyojana or fetter, that is Silabhata Paramasa. I think this one is the one of the list that is most misunderstood and obscure. We can begin with the translation, which is neither literal nor accurate. This common translation, rites and ritual clinging, is very misleading in itself. The word itself, Sila Bhata Paramasa, is a compound of Sila, Vata, and Paramasa. Paramasa means to depend on or rely on. Sila is ethics or morality. It's often equated with the precepts. And Vata is a word that occurs sometimes in the Vinaya. It means duties to be done. So Sila and Vata together could be said to be do's and don'ts. Now, when we look at that literal translation, relying upon precepts and duties, immediately we have to emphasize that the important point here is paramasa, reliance upon or dependence upon, because obviously we need to keep sila, we need to do our duties. We need to keep the precepts, we need to do our duties. That's not something to be abandoned. So it's not by saying that we should get beyond Sila Bhata Paramasa, it shouldn't lead to a kind of anarchic, amoral chaos. But what it means is that we should no longer depend on any kind of procedure or system to lead us to liberation. That the operation of the mind in its deepest level, and certainly the movement towards enlightenment, is not in any way mechanistic. It cannot be reduced to an algorithm. So by translating it rite and ritual clinging, a lot of people assume, oh, well, I don't have to worry about that one. I'm beyond rite and ritual clinging. I don't sacrifice chickens in the backyard to bring the rain. That taking too simplistic and literal a meaning from the English words. But that kind of ritualistic or mechanistic thinking is very prevalent in not only in ancient times, but in modern times as well. I would argue that it's one of the main flaws or causes of trouble and confusion in the world is this kind of mechanistic thinking that's tied up with materialism, which is just a different form of ritualism. It's not the old ritualism of appeasing the gods, but there's still a superstitious, ritualistic way of thinking that many, probably most people, fall into so easily. I think we could, just to take a real life example, you just consider the way people behave during COVID, following all kinds of ritualistic behavior. This was seen as way that they're either great fear or great desire, and they fall into a superstitious behavior to manipulate the universe in some way. Now we have in Buddhism, there are rituals and ceremonies, but we should understand the purpose of ritual and ceremony is not to perform some kind of magic subterranean control of the universe, but it's to harmonize the mind. The ceremony and ritual is a very useful practice. Chanting, bowing, these things that we do, they're a very important part of the practice that speak to a deeper level, to an intuitive kind of level. It's a physical expression of the intuitive wisdom. In fact, I would say there's a kind of Silabbata Paramasa that we see occasionally. People who, it's a negative Silabbata Paramasa. Occasionally people ideologically refuse to do anything that they regard as ceremony or ritual. They refuse to bow, they refuse to chant. That's not they don't see that as being an integral part of the practice, and they see it as superstition. But their attitude of complete refusal is itself a kind of a superstition. They're putting, just the same as if someone thought, the positive kind of Silabbata Paramasa, someone who thought that performing rituals flawlessly will lead to some great result. Someone who utterly refuses to perform any ritual act is also putting the same kind of undue importance upon it and understanding it in the wrong way. The Vedic religion that was prevalent in India at the Buddha's time was an extremely ritualistic religion. Could be taken to be an example of the most extreme kind of Silabbata Paramasa, and the Buddha often criticized them on those grounds. It was actually a belief in the Vedic Brahmanical practice that if you performed a ceremony exactly correct, down to the last gesture and the last syllable of the chanting, then the gods would be compelled to grant you the favor you asked. It wasn't so much as asking the gods, but requiring them. And if the result did not occur, someone maybe hired Brahmins to chant to cure his sick wife, or to bring rain for his crops, and the result did not happen. The explanation was, well, the Brahmins must have made a mistake. They they had the wrong mudras or they chanted the incorrect syllables. So that's maybe that Brahmanical religion is probably the most extreme example of Silabhata Paramasa. But what we should really be concerned with in terms of our practice of Silabhata Paramasa or overcoming Silabhata Paramasa is the more subtle form that occurs in the mind of the meditator, that the practice of meditation can become ritualistic in mechanism, intuitive. What we're looking at here is the balance between proper following of meditation practice and techniques and allowing the mind free play. And this is a subtle balance that has to be learned over time. In Buddhist countries, particularly in Burma, I would say has probably been forefront in this. There have been many specific meditation techniques developed over time. And some of them are very simple, and some are quite elaborate with different practices at different stages and so on. Not all of them are, and they've been developed they formed schools, and they're honed over centuries and developed and refined. They're extremely skillful. And the meditator now taking up one of these practices initially needs to follow the instructions closely to get results and learn the technique, learn the method. And but then there can come a point where that becomes the technique itself becomes a hindrance. One is kind of imprisoned or boxed in. And it's very subtle because you also don't want to fall into the opposite error of being completely freewheeling and have no discipline in the practice, and then you'll get nowhere also. The Buddha gave a simile once of the man, and I'm sure probably most of you are familiar with this one. It's a very well-known parable. The man traveling comes across a river, and he needs to cross the river. So he makes a raft out of bamboo, lashes it together, and paddles across the river. And the Buddha asks when he gets to the other side of the river, would he be wise to fix the bamboo raft onto his back and climb out onto the bank with it? No, the raft has done its job and it can be dismissed. And one can then climb out unencumbered and walk away. But what might be missed in this parable is that it would also be very foolish for the man to start breaking up the raft in the middle of the river, thinking, well, I don't need this anymore. So you need to use formal techniques for a long way, and you need to know when you can relax them somewhat and when you can abandon them altogether. And it's very subtle, and you don't want to rush things. And the experience of the unconditioned, the actual goal, the awakening, is not something, and this is probably the key point for understanding Silabhata Paramasa. The moment of realizing Nibbana is not something that can be done by will or forced, or uh, through some kind of formal algorithm. It's not like that. It happens. But what we can do, and what we need to do, is to prepare the ground. The uses the if you're planting a garden of vegetables, you have to prepare the soil, till the soil. You have to weed it, you have to water it, you have to put in a lot of labor. But you cannot. There's nothing you can do to make the seed sprout and the plant to grow. It does that on its own if the conditions are suitable. Now, one of Ajahn Chah's similes was, regarding the same point, was uh, it's like a farmer was going out into the rice field, and the rice is starting to sprout, and he tugs on the sprouts and says, "Grow faster, grow faster." That doesn't do any good. It might even uproot and kill the sprout. In the stages of insight that is found in the Visuddhimagga, and is probably modern people know it mostly from Mahasi Sayadaw's writings. He used this model extensively. The various stages a meditator goes through in Vipassana meditation. The critical stage is called equanimity about formations, and that's the last stage in which the meditator can reach by effort. Enlightenment can occur there and only there, but there's nothing the meditator can do to bring it on. It just happens. But you have to do a lot of work to get to that stage. But then when you're sitting in it, it's very peaceful and sublime, and the meditation is perfect, but there's no sense of putting in any effort. So you're not doing anything at that point. Anything you do just gets in the way, and it just happens, or it doesn't, and then you have to just keep going back to that stage. So to getting close to saying everything I wanted to say about this, I'll just kind of sum up. As often with these Pali terms in Buddhism, don't rely really on the English translations. Rite and ritual clinging is a poor translation. What we're really looking at is to get away from superstitious or mechanistic thinking about the mind and the process of awakening. So I'll leave those words with you, and let's have a look at the chat and see what questions I can respond to. Okay. Question from Maha Sunyata. At fourth jhana, does the breathing physically stop with the heartbeat, or is breathing detached from the mind? Because I heard some monks say the breath stops physically and some say it doesn't. That is a controversial point. Personally, I think that it doesn't actually stop. It becomes extremely subtle, and the mind is detached from the body enough that the mind is not aware of the breath. But there are others who say that there's actually a physiological change, and the breath actually stops. Do you think the Buddha regularly shaved his head, or was it more like a one-time event? Symbols of renouncing one's beauty, razors back then doing so with improper and sanitary apparatus, without availability of antibiotics could be fatal. What is the later development of the Sangha as a Was this manner later developed by the Sangha as a symbol of unison? I don't think the Buddha regularly shaved his head. We can't know for sure, but the actual Vinaya requires a complete shaving of the head only at ordination. And the rule is that one must keep one's hair shorter than 2 finger widths. So that's actually a fair bit of hair, 2 finger widths of hair. But the custom became over time that the monks would regularly shave their heads, and there's no unity in that tradition either, because like the group of monks I'm with, the Ajahn forest tradition, we shave our heads generally twice a month on the new moon and full moon. Other traditions will shave once a month, some once a week on the quarters of the moon, and some shave every day, keeping their head shaved all the time. It is a symbolic act. It's a renunciation of the world. But we go back, as I said, to the original Vinaya. It's required only to shave the head once. Next, I was recently reading the Dhammapada and noted it seems to have quite a different tone to the rest of the suttas. It reminded me of Taoist texts. Would you provide some background to this text? Well, first of all, I would say with the Dhammapada, you have to be careful of what translation you're reading. That text has been translated many, many times, and some of the translations are quite free. The author, the translator, it was done by someone who's had a Christian background. It makes it sound actually very Christian. I don't automatically know which one you're talking about that comes across as Taoist, but I can well believe it. The Dhammapada is a collection. The background of it is it's a collection of verses that, and most of them can be found elsewhere in the canon separately, but somebody at some point collected verses that the Buddha had spoken at one time or another and put them together in one short book. There's also a extensive Dhammapada commentary that has stories for every Dhammapada verse. That's been translated into English, and it's a pretty good translation called, the title in English is Buddhist Legends. So each verse has a story to go with it. Next question. Dear Ajahn, 5th and 6th jhanas are quite clearly labeled as infinitude of space, infinity of consciousness. Mind takes pleasure, satisfaction, settles indulgence, perception of dimension, infinitude of space. Does this state that space and consciousness are in fact infinite, or they could be at least conceived that way? If that is the case, it renders the concept of infinity as not inconceivable subjectively, rather than very hard to convey by a language. Well, I think that the intention in terms of the meditation is not to say anything metaphysical about space or even consciousness, but to bring up an imagination, a perception of that. So it's not a statement that space is actually infinite. But this, and the Buddha himself is well known that he refused to answer the question, is the universe boundless or not? But the later tradition definitely held that the universe was infinite. As this Buddhaghosa even states it definitively, that the number of world systems is infinite, so it is numberless. So there's that. It's also the definition of space itself in Theravada Buddhism is interesting, because this was one of the controversies between the Theravada and Sarvastivada. right? Which at the time of the Soka, there were the two main schools of Buddhism and were rivals. And they had some metaphysical differences, and one of them was on the nature of space. We generally talk more about their dispute over the nature of time, but they also had a dispute about the nature of space. The Sarvastivadins held that space was unconditioned, whereas the Theravada wanted to preserve that status only for Nibbana. Nibbana is the only unconditioned element. The Sarvastivada had space to be unconditioned. The Theravada definition of space, developed at that time, not from the Buddha, but from the commentators of that time, is that space is either conditioned or unreal. It's conditioned in a trivial sense. For example, if you dig a hole to dig a well or whatever, that space, that open space in the earth, is obviously conditioned. You conditioned it with your shovel, right? So that's a trivial example, but that's conditioned space. Otherwise, space is not real. It's just a construct of the mind to account for distance between points. Dear Bhante, is the chitta what gets reborn? If so, what made it exist to begin with? No, that this is particularly refuted by the Buddha, that there is no thing. You can't identify or name an element that gets reborn. There's simply a continuity. It's like lighting one candle from another. There's a continuity of cause and effect, but there's no actual transfer of any substantial entity of any sort from one life to the next. I see some Asian country people chant mantra in elections just for their representative to win. Is this Silabata Parabhasana? Yeah, I think it is. I think it definitely, that would count as Silabata Parabhasana. I've also heard of all kinds of superstitious practices around trying to win the lottery in Asia. That's another big one. Dear Ajahn, if right view has been experienced, isn't by definition stream entry obtained? Yes, but I think that's the other way around. Right view is only perfected after stream entry. That once stream entry is obtained, then right view is naturally perfected. Okay. So if there's no last questions, we'll round it up for now. And when we come back next time, we'll be dealing with Vichikicha. Okay. There's one question here. Am I right in thinking that taking the Bodhisattva vow without a Buddha present is not binding? That is the understanding in Theravada, which is different than Mahayana. In the meaning of the Bodhisattva vow in Theravada is that one chooses to practice for Buddhahood rather than for arahantship, taking the more difficult path, the longer, more difficult path out of compassion, because you can help many more beings. And practitioners can make that resolution at any time, but then they can renege on it. They can decide, well, this is too hard. I'm going to just practice the regular path until such time as they are in the presence of a living Buddha. Then they make that resolution, as the Buddha of our time did 92 aeons ago, before Dipankara Buddha. And then they'll be recognized by that Buddha, blessed by him, which is one of the meanings of Bhagawa, the Blessed One. There's a linkage between Buddhas over long aeons of time. Okay. Ajahn Mahabua says the first three fetters are nearly impossible to get rid of. True. Um, well, I think what he could mean by that is that they're more difficult to get rid of than people think. Um, but I don't think they're impossible, because people do overcome the fetters and do attain stream entry even in modern times. So they're difficult. Uh, because the subtlety, they can be sort of, people think I don't really, I kind of understand not self, I don't believe in rites and rituals, but that's helpful if you've got some cognitive intellectual understanding of these things, but it's not the same as the intuitive understanding, that the certainty that's held by a stream entered. Okay, so I'll leave you there, and we'll see you same time next week. Goodbye, all.